Hi, I'm Karen O'Neill, and I just retired from Rutgers University. I did environmental policy and environmental history. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a farmer, and I always sort of in the back of my mind, when you grow up in California, you're very aware of water, and so that sort of stayed with me. Then eventually I went to graduate school, and I was looking for just things that interested me, and I found that lots of people had already done irrigation. I saw this quote saying that the big money was in flood control. In other words, you really got a lot of benefits from getting flood control protection from the government. And so that's when I started researching flood control. And then different events, of course, happened, like Hurricane Katrina. And part of my work was about the Mississippi River. And so we did a book about race and Katrina. Then Hurricane Sandy, which is relevant to where we are today. And I did a book about that. The question for us was whether Hurricane Sandy or any other event would be transformational in the way people think about their environment. So after Hurricane Sandy, we did several different projects. Two of them had all sorts of community outreach. There were the Bay communities in New Jersey that were really hit hard, like Keansburg. And we spent a lot of time down there. We did interviews there. And then a different project, we did designs for potential ways of being more just ready for sea level rise and for storms. I just really remember people in Manasquan. I remember doing a focus group, and the people were so raw, and they just didn't know if they had a future there. And it was very interesting to me because they were up the river, so it's like an estuary. All these waterways are connected. And they said, we never thought of ourselves as a shore community. And that really, really stayed with me. It was a learning moment, I think, for all of us. And that was, I felt so bad for them because they just really did not expect to have salt water in their living rooms. So one of the reasons I wanted to come here to Jersey City was to kind of think about how our history in these places is linked to our current predicament or opportunities as well. So you can see behind me that there are plantings here. What they've done here, the landscape architects have really tried to echo the history of this area, which was wetlands. This is a big transformation from the way these waterfronts were. For the last 150 years or so, they were treated as industrial places, and then they were largely abandoned. And now we're in Jersey City. It's been redeveloped, and there's a lot of people living here. That's what this region needs now, right, is housing. And so it's very interesting to see these transitions. But the important thing about this is to understand what hazards also exist in these places. That's the thing that links up the design work and the policy research that I've done. So it is helpful to start where you live and to say, look at the maps, look at the flood maps in your area. And you can see the areas that have repeated flooding. We came here in part to look at how this landscape has changed over time by human alteration. And when we go and live in a place, it's really helpful to know a little bit about its past. Also to recognize there's still ecological functions that are there. And so you can look at whether your town has a lot of parks that have natural features and not just ballparks. So these are ways of understanding that all of these things are connected, right? As far as if you're getting the benefit of nature, whether there are hazards as well. We spent years waiting for international action on climate change, and you can see that the international agreements have not really done very well. What has tended to work a little bit better is pressure between countries. And one of the things that I think people really have a hard time understanding is where that action gets done. I will just give you a very a wonky kind of thing, which is the Chevron doctrine. For the past 40 years, the courts have given the agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency at the United States federal level the discretion to interpret laws passed by Congress and to set things like pollution limits. The Supreme Court this year has changed that. And so what this means is that the people in the agencies are going to be really concerned about whether or not they're going to have their decisions overturned by court. So this is the sort of thing like how many parts per million of diesel exhaust is allowable. Whether plant that is producing hydrocarbon, fossil fuels, has to reduce its emission of certain things. And one thing for water quality, for drinking water, is there was a recent ruling by the EPA to regulate PFAS, which are those permanent chemicals that just really do us no good at all in terms of public health. That is a new ruling. It probably won't be overturned, even if we get a different president. But with this overturning of the Chevron doctrine by the Supreme Court, or constraint of the Chevron doctrine, it might be harder for the EPA to actually enact these regulations that they've judged are important through looking at science. So that's the sort of thing, that's where the real work gets done. And it sounds boring, but when you look at it, that's where the real work gets done and where our health is either protected or not.